You are now live.
Thank you, Nikki. Welcome to the Scrutiny Commission, 7th of December. Remember, members of the public viewing the meeting via the live stream can only see the person who is speaking. Also, that it takes a few seconds for Zoom to switch spotlight to the person when they begin speaking. I'd like to introduce, please, my name is Councillor Seaton, and I want to make sure that it is being live streamed now, and it is. There are a number of things I would like to remind people before we start with the items on the agenda. Please note that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. Under the openness of local government bodies regulations, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disrupt the meeting business. Also, so that the meeting is not disturbed, could I ask everyone present to turn off your mobile phones and switch them to silent and ensure that your environment is distraction-free. And can I remind everyone that this is a public meeting, so please conduct yourself in an appropriate manner. Thank you. Can I also remind, this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly different. Members will need to introduce themselves and state their name and confirm that they can hear and see proceedings. This is an important part of the process of recording attendance and transparency of the meeting. I will do this by undertaking an alphabetical roll call. Members will use the raise hand facility feature in the participation sector of the Zoom software, and if they wish to speak and will be allowed to do so in a queuing system. Right, I would like to these councillors to verbally confirm that they can see and hear the proceedings. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jill Bolton, I confirm that I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you, Jill. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Grimley, I confirm I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Harger-Nicolau.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harger-Nicolau, I confirm I can hear and see the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hamilton, and I can confirm I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Ranson.
Good evening, Chair. I can hear and see the proceedings. It's Councillor Ranson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm Councillor Seaton, and I can see and hear the proceedings as well. Right, we have officers also today, and unfortunately have to go through the list of those as well. So, Councillor Jonathan Morgan, Leader of the Council.
Good evening, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Jolly good. Councillor Paul Mercer, the Lead Member of Private Housing.
Good evening, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee Harper-Davis, Lead Member of Community Support and Equalities.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Eileen Mallon, Strategic Director of the Community Planning and Housing.
Good evening, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Simon Jackson, Strategic Director of Environmental and Corporate Services.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you. Alison Simmons, Head of Strategic and Private Sector Housing.
Alison Simmons, Head of Strategic and Private Sector Housing. I confirm I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you. Richard Bennett, Head of Planning and Regeneration.
Richard Bennett, Head of Planning and Regeneration. I can see and hear proceedings, Chair.
Right. From now on, I'm just going to say your name because it seems as though you're all saying your title. And I'm not letting you do that twice. So, Sylvia Wright. Oh. No, right.
You're on mute, Sylvia.
Good evening, Chair. Sorry, I can see and hear proceedings. Thank you.
Head of Leisure and Culture. Matt Bradford.
Chair. I think Matt was invited by error. I don't think he's got an item on, so I have just advised him he doesn't need to stay. I hope that's okay.
Thank you, Eileen. That's fine. Alan Twelves.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Head of Regulatory Services. You see, it's all gone to pot now. Now I've said I'm not going to do it. Right, Leslie Tansley, Head of Financial Services.
I think Leslie's an apology for this one, I think, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. David Hankin, Team Leader, Regeneration and Economic Development. Fair enough. Suzanne.
Sorry, Chair. Difficulty finding the mute button. Dave Hankin, yes, I can see and hear you.
Thank you, David. Suzanne Kinder, Corporate Improvement and Policy Officer.
Yeah, good evening, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Steve Dibner, Regeneration and Economic Development Project Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Nikki Conway, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I confirm I can see and hear the proceedings.
And Sally Watson, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I can hear and see. We've also got Communications Manager Mike Roberts in attendance as well.
Okay, Mike, can you see and hear the proceedings?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm I can see and hear proceedings.
Jolly good. Thank you. Are there any apologies, please?
Chair, I better announce myself as well. Rob Mitchell, Chief Exec. I wasn't on the original invite list, but I've self-invited myself, so I hope you don't mind. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, those sort of people are pains at best.
Gate crashers, apologies. Thank you.
Okay, any apologies, please? I've lost my pen.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Brooks this evening.
Thank you very much. Right, minutes of the previous meeting on the 16th of November. I would like each person to verbally say that they received and note the minutes. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I've received and am content to note the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. I've received the minutes and content to note them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge-Nicolau.
Thank you, Chair. I have received minutes and I'm happy with them.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that I received the minutes and I'm content to note the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Ranson.
Thank you, Chair. I've received the minutes and I'm contented to actually note them. Thank you.
I've also received the minutes and I'm very content. So I will confirm that I've signed the minutes off. Thank you very much. Disclosures of pecuniary and personal interest, I do not have any. Declarations of the party whip, also I've got none to report. Questions under scrutiny committee procedure. There are no, procedures 11.16. There are no questions to be submitted. The first item that we've got on here is item 6, which is the recovery cell update. And I believe this is being presented by Eileen Mallon. Thank you very much, Eileen.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the latest report for Scrutiny detailing our approach to recovery and response in relation to the pandemic. And this particular report focuses our actions on the economic recovery cell. You'll be relieved to know, Chair, I won't go through all the details of the report because it is rather long. And as you can see, there's been a significant amount of activity over the last few months since you last considered the economic recovery item. And the latest live version of the work plan, which we're now on to work plan 5, is attached at Appendix A with details of all of the activities under the various work strands. There are a few areas that I'd like to point out to members within the report, which I think are of particular note in relation to the activity of officers who have been engaged in the economic recovery actions, and all of these officers from across the whole council. So there's not one particular service area, Chair, involved in this, but a lot of officers from all the different service areas. If you look at section 2.3, This gives details around the activities relating to supporting businesses in terms of the regulations, compliance and enforcement actions where necessary. The changes in the status of these activities throughout the various tiers and lockdowns applied to the borough at different times over the last few months is detailed on pages 17 and 18. And this shows the range of actions that officers have been involved in. If I may, Chair, although I'm not doing a full presentation, I do have a few slides. So if I can ask Sally to put the first slide up. What this shows is actually the volume of the activity that the officers have undertaken. And you'll see in there some big numbers. So as you can see, since April, officers have responded to almost 1,000 service requests, over 600 monitoring checks to businesses, and over 170 enforcement visits, along with a range of other activities around advice and supporting actions. In addition to these activities, Chair, there are also numerous meetings at a national, county and local level to ensure that these regulations are understood and that we are applying them correctly to our local businesses and giving businesses the most appropriate advice dependent upon the tiers and the regulations that apply at a particular time. So as you can see from that table, there's been a lot of activity from officers over the months to reflect those changes. Section 2.4 outlines the support we've been given to businesses in terms of opening up the high streets and ensuring that customers can access our businesses safely, both in person and online. I'd like to advise particularly about the online portal that has been created for local businesses who don't have an online presence or who may not have the ability to set up online easily. And slide 2, we've just got a screenshot of the front end of the portal, and this illustrates how the customers will see it and they'll be able to access at the time of writing the report. It may have increased since then, around 30 local businesses who have signed up for this service already. As detailed in the report, the longer term approach to recovery is being worked on in collaboration with colleagues from across the county through the LEP, which is developing an umbrella economic recovery action plan with all districts involved, along with other partners such as DWP being part of that delivery of that action plan. An initial recovery project, which we should see up and running within the borough by 1st of April, is the Careers and Enterprise Hub, which I've detailed in the report. And this is funded from upfront funding from the town deal. And that project is on track at present. So we are looking for that to be open on the 1st of April. Finally, Chair, as indicated in section 4, the return to tiers was announced at the end of November, with Charnwood placed in tier 3. And what this means is that non-essential retail businesses can open, but the hospitality sector remains closed apart from takeaway services. This is obviously disappointing for many businesses across the borough at what should be a busy time for them. But we are trying as far as we can to encourage customers to shop local as much as possible and to use local businesses where they can. And just to give you an illustration of how important it is for us to try and get customers back into our businesses, the footfall count on Saturday for Loughborough Town Centre was around 12,500, and compared to last year, so the first Saturday in December last year, it was over 26,000. So you'll see there's still quite a big gap in terms of footfall for the town centre. So you may have seen that we are trying to encourage local business activity through our Christmas campaign, which we've put up across the borough. And if Sally can put the final slide, there's our banner. So this is across all of banners, posters, the skirt around the Christmas tree, information boards, and hopefully you'll notice on there our COVID compliant messages so that people can be sure that they are shopping in a safe environment. And as you can see, we've even got Rudolph wearing his mask. So hopefully that will encourage our shoppers to get out and about. And with that, Chair, I'd like to invite any questions. We do have a number of the officers present who've been involved in the various work strand and who can go into any more details should members wish. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. The gap was quite huge that you said. It was half the expected footfall of that time of the year, but I think it's also a responsible gap. There's no way that we want it to end up like markets over the weekend, do we? So although it is a huge gap, we're looking after our residents as well as the stall holders. So I'd like to invite now other people to show their hands and ask some questions. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. It's more a comment than a question. It was a comment. It's just to note, I did get some feedback from the landlady of the local pub that has been shut because of the restrictions, and she did get her rant through really quickly, and she just wanted to ask me to mention that to officers because it's important to them that it was important to the public. They did get that. It just shows that these things are working, that officers are getting these things sorted out.
Thank you for that, Councillor Grimley. I myself have reported a couple of cases where other business people have noticed other business people opening, and you know, when the playing fields aren't level, then people feel unjustly put at a disadvantage. And the response I got from Charnwood was very quick, and the businesses were visited and advice was given on those occasions. So I was very pleased with that. As with the other recovery cells, I'm very impressed in the depth that you've gone to on these and how everything is followed up. So I do thank you. Is there any other officer that would like to say something there? Rob, is there anything you would like to add to this, or Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. If I may just come in, just to put on record really my thanks to the officers and to the members for all their support in regards to the work of this cell. There is clearly a lot more to do in terms of the current situation and then hopefully coming out of the pandemic in 2021 and supporting the economy through the next year and onwards. But we are looking at the here and now, but also starting to look further down the line and working with our partners both locally and across the county on these issues. So thank you to the officers for all the work they've done, and thank you to you members for your support.
Okay. Jonathan?
Just to reinforce the comments from the Chief Exec, I mean, it really is an amazing team effort from the officers, but likewise, all councillors play their part in this as well. And as you, Chair, and also Councillor Grimley have just remarked, the feedback to officers from members of the public and businesses, always important to work out what we're doing well and also what we could do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, there's no more hands up, so I'm going to have to thank Eileen for that presentation and any other officers that were there but are contributors to it as well. And if they want to go now and not on later, they need to go if they want to. Right, so we'll go on to item 7, which is audit update, audit committee update. And I don't think there are any, are there, Sally?
I don't think there is, Chair, unless Nikki Conway wants to come in and mention anything, as I know she was at that meeting.
Nikki?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, the chairs and vice chairs of the Audit Committee and the Scrutiny Commission did meet on the 9th of November. There is another meeting planned for the 8th of January. And also just to mention that the Audit Committee at their next meeting on the 22nd of December will be looking at adding to their work programme the monitoring of commercial property acquisitions on a quarterly basis. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikki.
Right, item 8, pre-decision scrutiny of any specific financial matters to be considered by the Cabinet. There are no items of that nature for the Commission to consider. Right, item now 9, Cabinet items of pre-discussion decision scrutiny. The following items have been identified for pre-discussion scrutiny at the Cabinet agenda for the 10th of December 2020. Item 9A then is discretionary private sector licensing scheme. You have the reports that came via a different envelope. We had several of them, and I'd like to ask Councillor Mercer to introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I became aware of many of the problems caused by a few rogue landlords in Loughborough several years ago, I myself became convinced that we needed some form of licensing, and this was one of our manifesto commitments in 2019, which we're now implementing. And essentially it's two different schemes. It's licensing of HMOs across the whole of Charnwood, and then selective licensing of all rented properties in just 2 wards, Hastings and Leamington Ward, in the centre of Loughborough. And in order to implement these schemes, we needed to jump through quite a few hurdles to make sure that there were no grounds for them to be challenged in the courts if we actually got it wrong. And one of the key aspects was the consultation exercise. And I was very impressed that we had 251 responses for the additional licensing. And of those, 75% of respondees strongly or supported the scheme, and less than 15% were opposed. On selective licensing, we had 154 responses, and almost exactly 2/3 supported and 1/3 opposed. On additional licensing, Madam Chair, the Rogue Landlord Project identified a significant number of HMOs in Loughborough that were not licensed under the mandatory scheme, and many of them had Category 1 hazards. Those are serious hazards that the council is obliged to take action on, and many had Category 2 hazards. Now, the total cost of this scheme per property will be £700, and that's spread over 5 years. And 1 or 2 landlords said, oh, you know, this is really expensive, we can't afford it. But that's probably, it's roughly about 2% of the amount of money that they'll generate over that period of time. And I think that's a small price to pay to ensure that these properties are safe and secure. And one of the keenest supporters of such licensing was the outgoing Vice Chancellor of the university, who said that one of his big concerns was that students in an unlicensed and dangerous property could die in a fire. And I certainly think he will be pleased that one of the things that we were doing as he retires is actually implementing the scheme that he called for. Those landlords who are accredited with Dash will receive a discount. Finally, on selective licensing, in order to justify the selective licensing scheme in Hastings and Leamington, it was necessary to show that there were problems in that area with the condition of the properties, as well as other issues such as crime and antisocial behaviour. And I believe that this particular scheme will improve the quality of our neighbourhoods in order to support safe, inclusive and cohesive communities. Finally, I would just like to say that this has involved a huge amount of work by Alison Simmons as head of strategic and private sector housing, by her team and many other officers. And I think we should be proud of the work that they've done and confident that it can be implemented without any hiccups. And Alison's here to answer any specific questions from members.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. I would like to ask a question of clarity, whether it's you or Alison. But I imagine that you've just told me the 2 areas that were singled out for discretionary licensing. Could you just explain the difference between the licensing of the whole of the borough and then discretionary licensing on those two areas. Could you explain what is the difference and why couldn't licensing across the borough take in those two separate places as well?
Well, the simplest answer, Madam Chair, is that additional licensing, which extends across Charnwood, is for HMOs, and the selective licensing, which requires a higher degree of proof, is for all rented properties in those two specific parts of Loughborough. But perhaps Alison could give a little bit more detail.
Thank you. And I'll ask one more question then for Alison probably to be able to answer. In section 2, under the reasons, it says the scheme will cover all HMOs, as you've just said, irrespective of the number of the stories. And it goes on to say where the building is wholly occupied by tenants. What if a tenant had 6 flats and left one of them empty? Would that mean that he was the landlord? I'm saying he, it's not, could be a she, has managed to get out of it? That's how it reads to me. Could I have an answer?
In relation, in answer to the first question, both schemes are discretionary schemes which we can introduce. We have the mandatory licensed HMO scheme, which we've had for many years, and that to start with was 3 or more stories when we had 363. That was then extended in October 18, I think it was. And since then, we've now increased that number of HMOs that are licensed to 636. Because in relation to the 3 stories, that was reduced. So when you're looking at that, that was with 5 or more people. So the additional licensing across the borough covers 3 or 4 unrelated people. So therefore, all HMOs, regardless to whether they've got 3, 4 or 5 people in, will all be licensed, and they'll all be treated in the same way and be expected to provide the same standards and management. In relation to the flats you've mentioned, it will cover all the section 250 HMOs. So that's buildings converted into self-contained flats. So again, it won't really matter how many's in a building if they're converted and they fall into the section 257, then they will have to be covered by a licence. So if you've got a particular case, provide the details outside of the meeting and I can look into that for you.
I haven't. It's just that popped into my head when I read it, Alison. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions. My first question is, I was absolutely astonished at the risk assessments. It's the first time since becoming a councillor that I've seen so many red risk assessments, and I did wonder, are we actually looking here at inherent risk or residual risk? Because clearly that is an important question, because if the red tables here relate to residual risk, then I might almost ask the question, why are we, if this is such a risky project, why are we even considering going ahead with it? So that's my first question, and I'll pause and wait for a response and then come on to my second one, please.
Thank you. Who would like to take that one? Alison?
Okay, in relation to the risk assessment, I always need to provide all the risks, whether they're red, amber, or whether there's no risks. I think the consultation responses show that there is support for the scheme, both from tenants, landlords, businesses, and residents. So it's just really to highlight the possible risks that could happen, because when you look across the country, various different areas have been affected by different risks. But what it has done on the other side of the fence, the balance is that it has improved standards and it has improved the management of accommodation.
But then I still come back to my question. Thank you for the response. But when we look, for example, at the first risk, landlords legally challenge the decision-making process. We've got a score of 16, which is the highest possible score, I understand. So are we saying that's the position that we would be in if we didn't put any measures in place, so inherent risk, or are we saying that's the position that we're currently in at the moment with having put measures in place?
In relation to the first one, I have sought legal advice, and I have got counsel's advice in relation to all the consultation and the justification reports and the frequently answered questions and all the consultation we've done to make sure that we can't be legally challenged, and we have followed all the government guidance, and that has come back conclusive that the statutory consultation has been undertaken in the correct way. In fact, in relation to the additional, it's actually had a longer period of time than is what is actually required, a statutory requirement. One of the issues that was raised was about the licence fee. And again, the licence fee is the same as what we currently charge for our mandatory licence. And that again is done in accordance with the guidance as to what we can and can't claim. We can't make a profit from the scheme. So this is where we could be challenged in relation to the licence fee, but it is a licence fee we've already are charging. There's two parts to it. So, and this was because of some recent case law, it has to be split, because the first part of the fee is to look at the application to see if we can actually issue a license. If we got to the point then that we didn't then issue a license, we wouldn't then charge the second, because we'd just say, no, you can't have a license, which is why it went through the courts, because the landlords were saying that it was unfair to be charged the full amount if you then didn't get a license at the end of it. So we've covered everything in relation to statutory guidance, recent case law, and we have sought legal advice in relation to that. But that doesn't mean to say that landlords still won't challenge the fact that we're trying to implement a scheme, and they can take a judicial review out against the council. So there is the risk that that could still go through that route. In relation to the comments received from MPO and the NRLA, which are in respect of landlords and what they see in relation to the schemes, that was more about from a landlord's perspective. It wasn't thinking about the tenant, the impact of the poor conditions and the bad management of the accommodation. But again, Council has said that as far as their comments, really, it's neutral, and there is no reason why we can't lawfully implement a scheme.
Councillor Bolton.
Okay, rather than take up too much time here, I think it's something I need to go away and think about it, because I'm still not absolutely clear exactly what we're saying in this table. But as I say, I don't want to take up any more time at this meeting, perhaps.
Sorry, is if Cabinet approve this, we then have to do a 3 months notice period, and that is within the time period that we could get a judicial review in relation to implementing the scheme. And it's the same with the selective licensing. That has to go to the Secretary of State to consider whether they will approve it, and then we have to do the 3 months notice period. So that is why the risk is on here, because we still have the risk until the scheme is in place that we could be challenged.
Okay, I think the reason I'm a little bit confused, I was a risk management consultant in a previous existence, so I've done a lot of this type of work. And I just think that the way that this risk assessment has been put together on this scheme is somewhat different to the way that risk assessments are put together in other papers that I've seen. But I don't want to dwell on that at the moment. My second question is, this requires a fairly hefty investment. We're looking at £65,000 up front, plus 200 and something thousand, 210, 11,000 for staff costs. What's the payback period on that? You know, because it's a huge investment for us to make at a time when we are suffering a lot of severe financial difficulties, along with many other councils. So if we invest that 275, 280,000 in year one, when will we actually start getting the licensing money in sufficient to cover the cost to us? Thank you.
The actual budget request is 65,000. It's not the total amount. The scheme is cost neutral. The approach will be that I will stagger recruitment, and as we get license fees in, that will then cover the money, any money that we've had to use up front. The license fee is paid on application, so the team will be small and will only build up as and when we get enough license fee that's over and above that amount. Because what we don't know is, I've based this on the figures of what we know at this point in time. There could be less HMOs, there could be less of the private sector that actually require a license. So that is why initially the whole team, based on the numbers of licenses that I would anticipate we would get, without having the money at day one, we will be doing it on a staggered basis in accordance with the license fee as we receive it.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Alison.
Sorry, can I just clarify something, because I haven't read 200 and whatever thousand. All I'd read was the scheme will cost us initially 65,000. Is that correct, Alison?
That is correct. What it does in relation to the staffing costs is, in a year it would cost, oh, hold on, sorry, I want to make sure I quote the right figure. In a year it would cost 211,000.
Yeah.
Right figure. Yeah, 211,974 if I had the full team from day one, which is not my intention. It will be to have an admin officer and 2 housing standards officers that can then process the applications.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. There's kind of 3 points or questions or clarifications that I would like to make. First, concerning the selective licensing. Now, for transparency, I'm one of the ward councillors for Hastings Ward, so I took a particular interest in that. So I'd like to thank Councillor Mercer for kind of giving us some of the rationale as to why Hastings and Leamington. But I suppose one of my questions are, there must have been certain kind of thresholds that have been looked at to have been passed to trigger those 2 particular wards. And there's probably other, shall we say, pockets of concern elsewhere throughout the borough. So is there a possibility in the future that this could be expanded at some future time? In other words, it's just a simple question. The next point is, again, going back to this risk register, you have these additional licensing borough-wide, and you've got the selective licensing for Hastings and Leamington, but the risk register seems to have kind of grouped them together. What was the rationale for that, rather than splitting them apart? Or why don't they have the separate risks? Simple question for clarification. And third, page 7, where it lists on the risk register, the second one from the bottom, where it talks about illegal evictions, homelessness and empty homes. First of all, it states that this has not been the experience in other local authorities. And then it also mentions that the council will continue to work with landlords and tenants to prevent homelessness. But it mentions enforcement action will not be taken for illegal evictions. Does that mean that if there is an illegal eviction, will the council do nothing? I mean, what does that mean? That's how it reads to me. So am I misreading it in some way? Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
So in relation to the expansion, yes, but we would obviously have to carry out the same amount of research as we have for the 2 wards concerned, and we'd have to make sure we've got enough factual evidence to be able to take that research forward, and we'd also need the resources to be able to do that. So in relation to that, yes, we can. The second question was about the overall risk register, why there wasn't 2 separate ones. I think it's because the same things can happen with either of them. It could be that we get legally challenged on the selective licensing rather than the additional. So again, that's why there's no differential between the two. And then I think in relation to illegal evictions, what we're trying to do there, enforcement action would not be taken for illegal evictions. Well, we would take enforcement action. I think I might have made a typo there. It hasn't necessarily been the experience of other local authorities. We do get legal evictions now, regardless to whether we've got a selective licensing scheme or an additional one. And we would take the necessary action where it was appropriate. And we'd use the existing Housing Act for that purpose. So I think there's an error there. So I apologise for that.
No, thanks for that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I have a question on the right on page 5, reason 3, I think it was, that it be noted that the borough-wide accreditation scheme with the Students' Union will not be taken forward. And then the reason for that was resources were no longer available from the Student Union to take the scheme forward. Could you just elaborate on that for me, please?
Could I come in on this?
Sorry, on page 5.
Yes.
That relates to a previous report.
That's on the 17th of January, but obviously it still applies. I just want
on the
this
was a scheme where the student union had suggested that students get involved in the accreditation. And initially they did have resources to take this forward, and we did try and work it through, but there was quite a concern in relation to the basis on which the inspections would be completed, and their knowledge in relation to enforcement and the health and hazard rating, safety ratings, and the health and safety issues in relation to any fire risks if they missed anything, if you were basing it on students carrying out those inspections, which is why then it was disbanded in relation to taking that forward, because again, also they didn't have the resources, but I had huge concerns about who would be carrying out the inspections and then how we take the enforcement action based on that.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one more before we go to Councillor Mercer. Well, what is the reinvestment reserve fund?
Simon, would you like to answer that one? Because this was previously when we were going to have money for a consultant, which we didn't have.
Right, that was the 30,000. Ah, right, okay. And that was, okay. I don't need any further than that then. Thank you very much. Councillor Mercer.
Could I just add, Madam Chair, that where other councils have sought to introduce these schemes, landlords have threatened and at times tried to implement legal actions against the council, arguing that mistakes have been made. And even when those councils have got it absolutely right, that doesn't actually stop the landlords attempting to do it. And I don't think that we should, this scheme is being introduced not for ideological reasons, but because there's a genuine concern that some landlords, a minority of landlords, are acting irresponsibly and they're putting their tenants at risk. This is not done for ideological reasons. It's done for genuine concern that there is a problem out there. And I don't think that the threat of the landlords launching some action that may fail should actually deter us from doing this. And perhaps I could just remind Councillor Bolton that it was actually Labour Party policy in 2015 to introduce such a scheme.
Thank you very much. Right, there are no more hands up. It's very comprehensive. The hoops, oh, there is a hand, a finger waving at me. Councillor Bolton.
I wasn't meaning to wave my finger at you, Chair.
I know, you were.
But I would like to respond to Councillor Mercer by saying that I was not criticising at all the process that we're going through. I was simply challenging the way that the risk assessment in this situation has been carried out. Thank you.
I think sometimes we look for confrontation that isn't there sometimes. Right, I see no more hands up. I was just going to say it's very comprehensive, lots of hoops that landlords do have to jump through. And I am a landlady myself as a property in the city, Leicester City. And when I first bought the property, it was fair rents. It was part of a something for fair rents. So I couldn't put the rent up unless I did this, that and the other. And there seemed to be a lot more control then. And I think there's a lot of shoddy flats out there, and anything that we can do to make the tenants of those flats any better, then we should be pursuing it. And I do take your point that when I went and saw all this red on here, and normally we don't expect that at all, but the risks, as long as they're managed. And one question, if we find it's not working and it's costing the council an arm and a leg, is it something we can withdraw from?
Each scheme has a life cycle of 5 years, after which time you have to review and make a decision whether to continue. And I think if we take a staggered approach, then we won't be in a position and monitor it all the way through that we wouldn't be at a loss. And then we'd have to review to see whether it was successful or not and whether to carry on. But we'd have to go through a similar process again in relation to consultation, etc. There will be another aspect of the consultation in relation to the licence conditions, because part of the consultation was asking people what they thought should be included in them and what the principles should be. And so we have got draft licence conditions as part of this report that will go out for a 6-week period of consultation, which isn't a statutory requirement, but it's just to make sure that everyone's got an opportunity to feed into those conditions before we implement any schemes if approved.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mercer, would you like to close this at all? There's no more hands up.
Merely to thank you, Madam Chair, and your committee for giving us a good grilling. It's nice to actually come to scrutiny and to be asked some searching questions.
Right. Thank you very much. I forget which page I'm on now. Right, so I'm assuming, yes, it's all right, I'm down here. Right, now I need to ask the committee if they support the recommendations set out in the report to the head of Strategic and Private Sector Housing. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I support the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. I support the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge-Nicolau.
Thank you, Chair. I do support the recommendations.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I support the recommendations.
Councillor Ransom.
Thank you, Chair. I support the recommendations.
And I support the recommendations also. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to item 9B, which is Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy 2020 to 2024. And I'd like to invite Councillor Harper-Davis to open this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you all. So Tormund as a local authority has both a legal and moral duty to show fairness and equality to our residents, our service users and obviously our employees. The current equality strategy was adopted by Cabinet in 2016, and it was agreed that the current strategy would be reviewed and updated after 4 years and refreshed to take account of the Council's legislative requirement to revive its priority equality objectives by 2020 as prescribed in the Equality Act of 2010. And it's something that we have to do every year, and it's a very important document to us. I'm happy to hand over to the officers if they'd like to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne Kinder.
Yeah, just to carry on from that. So we do have an obligation to produce a strategy under the Equality Act 2010, and we're required to do that every 4 years. And in line with that, we're required to produce priority equality objectives every 4 years as well. And in part of in publishing our strategy is to be transparent in the work that the organisation is doing with regards to equality, diversity and inclusion. The strategy has been updated and it does say in my report that due to COVID we've not been able to do any direct consultation on this particular strategy. Just to confirm to Scrutiny that we did undertake a resident survey as part of the corporate strategy in 2019, of which a number of equalities questions and equalities monitoring questions were included within that. So the responses of that have been used to form the priority equality objectives within this strategy, alongside any consultation that's been undertaken as part of equality impact assessments and generic consultation that's taken place across the organisation over the past 4 years as well. So whilst direct consultation hasn't taken place due to the pandemic, a range of indirect consultation has taken place for the development of the strategy. Just any questions to the panel?
Thank you very much, Susanna. Just a query really. Because obviously equality, diversity and inclusion has been going on for such a long while. You'd think that we'd not unearth something else, but we do. Obviously, each time a strategy is rewritten, some things are, they drop off by the wayside and other things items. So what do you think is the biggest addition in this strategy? It's something more that you've had to concentrate on. Would it be a reflection of events that have happened in the recent times?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I would say, in particular, the Equality Act hasn't particularly changed in the public sector. Equality duty hasn't massively changed over the past 4 years of the current strategy. A number of different pieces of sub-legislation have come into play over the past couple of years, such as the Gender Pay Gap, the Modern Slavery Act, and things like that. So we've had to do additional elements alongside our generic public sector equality duties. So I'd say they're now integral parts of our revised strategy. But also, there's obviously, like you said, about different events and things. There's a lot of prominence on the Black Lives Matters events, and there's a lot of ambiguity around LGBT matters as well. So that I've tried to incorporate those within the revised strategy as well, to take account of current events and the external environment as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. What I want to ask is about, and I know you're part of Leicestershire Equalities Forum, aren't you? So when you're kind of putting together all these actions and so on, all the kind of metrics, I mean, do you do any benchmarking? And I don't mean in terms of how we're performing, but benchmarking as in, how do you capture it? What sort of measures are you using? What actions do you use? What are your success measures? Do you kind of compare with others to kind of see you're kind of on the same sort of page as to how best to kind of track what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, if I may, Chair. Yes, so we do very much benchmark it alongside the Leicestershire Equalities Forum and our partner organisations, in particular Leicestershire County Council. They produced their strategy last year, so they're slightly ahead of ourselves, and we very much utilised them. We had forums with the County Council to make sure our strategies were aligned and some of our actions were aligned. And I know a number of our district partners are also producing strategies within the next 12 months, and they will be looking to align theirs with ours and the County Council as well. Those meetings take place on a quarterly basis, and we do bring together any partnership actions and single actions to discuss around that table, and the measure of success, it can be developed through that partnership setting as well as on an individual setting as well.
Okay, thanks for that. It's just that this is always quite a complicated thing to kind of measure, because it's almost kind of subjective at times, and it's I think that's useful. So it's useful to kind of talk to others, so we're not reinventing the wheel if other people have done things, and that there is an alignment. So yeah, thanks for that.
Is there anybody else that would like to ask any questions or clarification on this? No, then thank you very much. So now we'll go to see how I'm going to ask each councillor if they are ready to accept the recommendation, please. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to accept the recommendations.
Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to accept the recommendations.
Councillor Harsh-Nicolau.
Thank you, Chair. Accept the recommendations.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to accept the recommendations.
Councillor Ranson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to accept the recommendations.
And I'm quite happy to accept the recommendations also. Now, item 9C was Bedford Square Gateway Public Realm Project, and this is an exempt report and will be considered under item 14 on the agenda. The next item is item 10, pre-discussion scrutiny for cabinet response, page 83. Simon, would you like to introduce this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a straightforward little report. It just goes through it just considers the cabinet decisions following pre-decision scrutiny of this commission, of this committee previously. And the two that the cabinet have considered since the scrutiny commission last met were around Shepshed Town Centre Public Realm Improvement Project and the Building Control Alternative Service Delivery Project. On both those occasions, the Scrutiny Commission supported the officer recommendations and Cabinet subsequently adopted those recommendations. So that really is the report in a nutshell. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon, but we're not going to let it go as quick as that because we're moving on to item 11, which is the Scrutiny Work Programme as set out on page 85. Could you introduce that report, please, Simon?
Yes, certainly, Chair. I think the key thing with this report is that at the meeting of the 16th of November, 12th of October, it was agreed that members would consider whether the Scrutiny Commission members would consider whether they wanted to add any items to the Scrutiny Commission work programme relating to the postponed meetings of the scrutiny committees, being the Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee, the Housing Planning, Regeneration and Regulatory Services Scrutiny Committee, and the Neighbourhoods and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee. So all those, so when COVID arose, of course, those committees were all in train and they all had a work programme. So Scrutiny Commission members were asked whether there was anything from those work programmes that they would like Scrutiny Commission to consider. So I believe that exercise has happened, and if I may maybe refer to Sally Watson, our Democratic Services Officer, just to relay the feedback from members at that point.
Well, obviously that also includes item 12 as well, Sally, which is the Scrutiny Commission work programme. If you can run both of them together, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. We asked members of the Directorate-based Scrutiny Committee to identify any items for the Scrutiny Commission agenda, and the bulky waste collection charges item from the Neighbourhoods and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee work programme has been identified, so that will feature on the next agenda of the Scrutiny Commission. And if any members of the Commission can identify any other items they wish to add to their agenda for the next meeting from the appendices starting on page 87.
I must say I was extremely pleased to see that Councillor Popley put this one forward, and that what we suggested with the scrutiny meetings feeding into the Scrutiny Commission was working. But I would invite probably more members to be able to do that. Okay, so if we go through the pages. Which page, sorry, Sally?
It starts at page 87, Chair. So you've got all three Directorate-based Scrutiny Committee work programmes there.
Well, I've I've not really identified anything from there at the moment. But if there's anybody here from the committee does identify something that they would like to discuss at future meetings, will you please do get in touch with me or Sally, and we will factor those into the meetings coming. That's all right, Sally?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so now we move on to item 13, which is exempt from the public. And I propose to exclude members of the public from the meeting during the consideration of this item on the grounds that it will involve a likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. And it is considered that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest of disclosing information. I would like a seconder for that, please.
I will second that motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Right, I will also take a vote to say that you verbal vote to say that you are for or against the proposals, or abstain. Councillor Bolton.
I'm for the proposal, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge-Nicolau.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for the proposal.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I support the proposal.
Councillor Ransom.
I support the proposal, Chair. Thank you.
And I also support the proposal. Right.